Hello, and welcome to today's Expert Chat on Understood. My name is Andrew Lee, and I'm an editor here. I work on a lot of our legal and school services content. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items about the chat. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a chat window. That's where you can ask your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. If you're comfortable, tell us your name and where you're from. But if you'd like to ask questions anonymously, that's fine too. Today we'll be talking about how third grade retention laws or third grade reading laws work and how they might affect your child. Joining us today is Lindsay Jones, Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Lindsay, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about NCLD?
Sure. Hi. I'm Lindsay Jones with the National Center for Learning Disabilities. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy. I'm really excited to be here today. The National Center for Learning Disabilities has been around since 1977, and we represent, and we're led by parents. We're a nonprofit led by parents, and we represent all of the issues that they are focused on to empower students in school, work, and life.
That's great. Great to have you here again. You were here a few weeks ago for an expert chat, and it's nice to see you again. Before we get to some of the questions from the people watching, let's give people a little bit of background. What are third grade reading laws?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for taking up this topic. I think it's really important and really timely right now. So over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen probably between 30 and 40 states pass laws that are setting a standard for how students should be performing in reading at third grade. This is something that's different from the way we looked at third grade reading in the past, and I think it's important to talk about from the very outset why we'd focus on third grade. So there's two just critical reasons I want to use today to set some of the context for our discussion. The first is that it's commonly held that before third grade, students are really learning to read. After third grade, they begin even more intensely reading to learn. And so reading after third grade becomes more complicated, and it becomes a way that they're learning lots of information in all of their classes. So third grade is a critical year for that reason. The second reason is that after many years of looking at statistics about how our students perform, all students, not just students with learning and attention issues, but definitely those as well, some very troubling statistics came out about students who were dropping out of high school and how they performed in third grade reading. So for example, one study indicated that 88% of students who drop out of high school were not proficient in third grade reading. So indications like that showed policymakers they really needed to take some steps to look at this area. And these state laws are one attempt to do that.
Wow, so third grade really is a pivotal year. I think most parents, when they hear of third grade reading laws, retention or the practice of retention, which is holding a child back, seems to come to their mind. But it seems like there's a little bit more going on with these laws. Can you explain sort of, besides retention, what they're all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say we will talk about retention because it's the most notable part of most of these laws. But I think it's important to explain all of the many other things they should be doing. So these laws were meant to address, from a systems perspective, ways to ensure students were getting the effective reading instruction and interventions they needed in kindergarten, first, and second grade so that students would be reading proficiently and are reading proficiently by third grade. So all of the laws are different. Remember, I mentioned they're between 30 and 40 state laws. All of them are different, and it's really critical to look at your state's law because there truly are not two that are the same, but they have some similar components. And some of these components that go beyond retention include things like beginning to monitor students' reading really closely, starting in kindergarten. For example, in Colorado, part of their law mandates that at the end of the kindergarten year, teachers really deeply assess how a student is reading in kindergarten. And so some students may not yet be reading, but we know from evidence there are critical skills that demonstrate the precursors to strong reading that would be happening in kindergarten. And so Colorado's early focus on, at the end of that year, do we see these important signs? And if we don't, are we in first and second grade putting into place the intensive interventions that we need, is one model. On the flip side, you have some other states, California is an example, where as a part of their reading law, they don't start reading interventions and really assessment in the same kind of deep way until second grade. I want to be clear that NCLD doesn't support or endorse any one law. We do have a set of best practices that we point to, but the laws are more robust than the retention element to them. In addition, and the last thing I'll say is, if a student is not proficient in third grade and they are going to be recommended for retention, there should be a whole host of things in place. So we're not talking about holding a student back and doing all the same stuff that you did last year, this year. It should be a completely different system where children are receiving intensive interventions and supports in reading.
Thanks. That actually does give a lot of background to all the different states sort of doing different things with these laws. We have a question actually that came in here, and I'm going to read it aloud. Because it seems like we have this effort to get kids to be successful by third grade, so we can kind of avoid some of the things that might happen if they're not reading, dropping out of school, et cetera. But we also have the worries of what retention could do to a child. So the question is, how can we balance the effort for third grade retention with an effort to improve success by third grade? So if you want to address that.
Yeah, this is such a great question. So I want to say one critical factor about retention. We are not, in the cases of these laws, we shouldn't be talking about retention when you and I were in school, Andrew. We're not talking about we hold you back and hope that having just by holding you back a year, that just one more year will help you develop more. So I think these laws, you have to think of them as they're trying to change the myth that's out there in our education system and among the world generally, that we have too many parents who may raise concerns to a school and say, I'm not sure Maxwell's reading in the way he should be. Can you show me? Is he reading where his peers are reading? I feel like I'm seeing signs of concern. In too many cases, we have parents reporting to us that when they raise that question about their child, the school says, don't worry, it's just development. He'll get over it. He'll learn. That can quickly turn into a situation where fourth, fifth grade, no one has learned, and we have to take a look now when your student is really reading to learn, as we talked about, and they're missing huge critical components of the curriculum. So the use of retention isn't just we're going to hold you back and see if you, over time, it's just taken you a little bit longer to learn this. It shouldn't be that at all. That is associated with evidence of very negative social and emotional impact from that type of use of retention. Use of retention that is targeted, that allows for new interventions, progress monitoring, and allowing children to move on when they're ready. So if when a new intervention is provided and 6 months later you need to have access, your reading has progressed to a level where you can where you can access all the information you need to, there should be plans to get you to your grade level in an appropriate way. So I think the way you balance, as the question talked about that, is by ensuring that if you, first of all, before you get there, you know where exactly that student is performing, and you've seen interventions that are applied. If you use it, you truly are using the time well, and you've got a plan in place that outlines specific interventions and talks about monitoring that child's progress.
That's really helpful. I mean, it's sort of it's bigger than any one thing. It sounds like you're saying. On that note, in terms of states, how many states and this is a question from our audience, do you know how many states pair that sort of early screening, early intervention, those best practices with these third grade reading laws? Like, how many states are we talking about that have sort of good policies, or so that if a child is struggling, they get some help at this? And if I'm a parent out there and I'm watching this and I'm concerned about it, How do I find out what my state's law is? So how do I figure that all out?
Sure. So I don't have a perfect number. I mean, these laws are so different. I really encourage you as a parent to look to your state's law. So let me start with sort of that part of the question first. I would say there's a link on ncld.org to some of our documents that we've created about third grade reading laws. They give you a lot of good information. And on the back of one of them, or you'll see in the link, we do highlight some promising state practices and some states with room to improve. The best thing you can do is look at your state website, and you can frankly ask your school. You can call the State Department, ask if they have a law that sets a standard for student performance by third grade and involves any type of retention. I want to make one thing clear for some members of our audience. When I say these laws are varied, they are all over the map. Now, they have some essential components, but one of the things where when we develop these recommendations, we develop these with the Learning Disabilities Association of America, and we had a series of experts kind of go through. We also had a lot of partners look at them. But one thing that was critical is that we do feel that, some of these laws will have exemptions for students who have IEPs, so for students with disabilities. For some students with disabilities, especially those with reading disabilities, in fact, namely only those with reading disabilities, that is an exemption which may be appropriate, and they need to have, we need to be looking critically. We should already be taking a deep look at the interventions that are being provided, monitoring that student's progress, providing them accommodations, audiobooks where necessary, all those things. I say that as though that's like so easy, but but that should be in place. It's a separate expert chat, hopefully we'll get to talk about. But there are some states that really troubled us in that they exempted any student with an IEP. That is an exemption that is concerning to us because it reinforces a notion that students with disabilities in general are just separate from the rest of our education system, need to be excluded, have to have their own standard. I don't think anyone out there would say my student with an orthopedic impairment, with a speech language impairment, would need to be separated out from a reading system that's meant to be put in place and shouldn't get access to these other interventions. So you need to look at your state's law. The best place to go is your school. If that doesn't work, you go to your state. Their websites usually actually have a lot of information about this, and you need to kind of carefully understand what you should know about how that law may impact your student.
So yeah, that's all great information. I think that first step is sort of talking to your school, as you said. If a parent is presented sort of with, the choice, or not, I don't know if it's a choice, it depends, I guess, on the school, if it's a law or if it's a recommendation. Do you have any views about the sort of the pros and cons of being held back? My understanding is that the research says it's generally not a good idea. But I know that's a very individual decision. Is there a place is that something you can speak to, or do you think, or how can someone, if you can't speak directly to it, do you know where can a parent get information about how to make that decision, or even how to think about that decision?
Sure. I mean, I want to answer that in three ways. First of all, the research about retention is inconclusive because, yes, what you're saying and kind of what I was talking about a little earlier, which is retention for retention's sake, is not a good thing. It is an individual decision with the student, but we have a lot of research that shows retention for retention's sake was applied too often to minority students, namely African American males. It was a replacement for appropriate interventions and teaching, and it led to very negative social and emotional consequences for those students. On the other hand, we have, aligned with some of these laws, now Florida's had its law for 15 years. We actually have pretty decent research on what retention, when coupled with these interventions, can do for students. So you've got to have a law that's a little more nuanced in that sense and actually provides those. I want to make another point that's really important. Probably our key recommendation here is that no parent should be faced with that decision at the end of third grade. So every one of these laws, and they do this to a varying degree, but every one of these laws should include good notice requirements for parents about what's happening. what progress is my student making? They need to be engaged so there's no surprises as to what's happening. The third thing I want to say is that if that happens to you, if you were approached by your school and they said your student is not proficient in reading, under our law we need to retain them, the first thing you need to do is understand what are the other options available. So you've got to look at your state's law. Several states will allow a teacher portfolio of work to be used to show that a student actually is proficient in reading but needs other interventions. Some states will use a summer program to allow a student to be to become a proficient in reading. So there's other options. In many of the state laws, there are multiple measures for showing how students can demonstrate proficiency in reading at third grade. So you shouldn't be confronted. You should have had knowledge before. And also, if you are confronted, you need to know right away, what are the other options to demonstrate proficiency? And what are the interventions I'm getting? What's the plan I'm getting with retention? So is it just retention, or are you giving me a plan with different interventions?
That's really good to know. I mean, even in first grade or second grade, you should sort of, according to what you're saying, you should have some sort of
Yes.
notice, or knowing that what's may be coming up. I wanted to highlight an article that we have on understood.org that also, it's actually the next tab, that shows a little bit, gives a little information to parents who might be watching about what might go into this decision. It's a very complicated decision, but I do want to say that if you can't pick up everything that's being said here, you can go to the site, and there's one of our experts has actually taken on this question and talked a little bit more about sort of learning to read, reading to learn, and many of the the different aspects that might go into the decision. We have actually another question here about Georgia. I don't know if it's a question, but it's a comment about Georgia, and they say many schools do that, and I think they're referring to having a third grade reading laws here in Georgia, and the majority of the children, as a result, stay at a third grade level of reading and comprehension. And I'm not sure. I think what this person is saying is that I think that what they're saying is that it hasn't necessarily helped there. But I don't know if that's something that you want to respond to, or if it's something that you may not have enough information to respond to.
So I think the way I would respond to that is I would say, one thing about this is you should be able to go to your state and they should be releasing statistics. We should have data that tells us, of those students who are being retained in third grade, how many are proficient in reading in fourth grade. And if you don't see those numbers rising or increasing, if we don't have those students proficient in fourth grade, then there's a problem and they need to revisit the way the law is working, either the way the law is written or the way it's implemented. So the thing I would say is, as we say with all of this stuff, the data is king here, and it gives us a terrific lever to make change where the laws are not working.
Great. I just also want to share a comment from, and I think this goes back to your comment about making sure that parents have early notice of this. This is a statistic from Mark Halpert, who says, we know Mark Halpert, says almost 90%, key statistic, almost 90% of first graders with word ID problems or identification problems will be poor readers in fourth grade. Parents need to initiate action as early as first grade. So I think he's basically echoing what you're saying, which is that, earlier is better. Make sure that you as a parent are focusing on this, and if you have any questions, go to, first step is obviously talk to your school. I have another question. So where's the future of these laws headed? What are we going to see something, you said all the laws are all over the place, state by state. Will we see something one day that's more uniform across states so that parents kind of have a little bit of a more clear view of things? I mean, I could see myself right now, I live in New Jersey. I have no idea what the reading law is there. I can see it can be extremely confusing. I mean, and then there's the evaluation. So, the evaluation process. So I'm just wondering, is there going to be some sort of movement to sort of a uniform standard, across states in terms of these third grade reading laws? What do you think is on the horizon for that?
So that's a good question. First of all, hi, Mark Halpert. Mark Halpert, one of our amazing parent leaders in Florida. Thank you for writing in a question, doing great work on Florida. Third grade reading, and also throughout the nation, also a leader in LDA. One of the reviewers of our document, I know, through LDA. Thank you, Mark. So it's the future of these. Well, I mean, this is the way. So it's a really interesting question, right? So right now, the Congress is looking at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESCA, also known as No Child Left Behind. And one of the things that is, so one of the things that is a way for changes to make their way into that major federal legislation that applies equally to all states is for lots of states to start churning and having these laws. It's the laboratory of intervention of invention. It's the way our federal and state system works. So it's highly likely, given so many states have passed these laws, that we will start to see some federal legislation, some incorporation into some of our larger education laws that does begin to import some of these standards. I think the good thing about our state system is we can see, and there's many things that are good about the state system, but one of them in this case is we can get the data that we were talking about and say what practices do work, what practices are better than others. And I think if you look at our document, I mean, it's hard to say, we don't, as I said earlier, we don't endorse one state law. These, even in over 10 and 15 years, they're still relatively new, and they're applied so differently that it's amazing to watch them play out. And it's important as a parent to know, what can I do if something like this happens? And I'm glad we're able to shed light on this with this webinar or expert chat, because I think most parents don't know about this. I didn't know necessarily. And there has certainly in the last 5 years been more of these laws passed than before that. And when a law is passed, there's usually a 2 to 3 year implementation period. So like Arizona, for example, one of the laws that recently passed in our nation, implementing this year as the first year, this school year, this 14-15 school year. I believe that's right. It's either this year or last year, but they're just phasing in now. And so you really do need to go to your state and your school and find out what's going on. And as for the future, hopefully, in the best case scenario, great lessons that are learned do become standardized in our national laws and are the same throughout the nation.
Great. That's a good way to sort of get a feel for what's going on. I have another question here from someone in our audience, and this goes back a little bit to the idea that wait to fail is not an option, which another of our commenters said. But I guess if you have a child in first grade, if a parent has a child in first grade, what are some ways the parents can initiate action for that child? If the child has poor reading or word identification problems, so what would you say if a parent was watching and now they're hearing about reading laws and they just want to sort of figure out what to do? How do they initiate action?
The first place is with the teacher. And I think it's understanding the reading program that's in place in the school, really talking to the teacher if your school has a reading specialist or reading coaches, any other professionals in the building who help work with the teachers implementing those reading programs, understanding how your student is performing compared to grade level and what are they doing to monitor your student's performance throughout the year. I couldn't agree more with the comment, wait to fail is not an option. We know that doesn't work. And I think it is meant to be driving these laws. I mean, I will say, retention as a practice, it's provocative at best. And it is gathering some good evidence when these laws are applied well. But it's still a very scary thing to think about as a parent, the social impact, all of it. It's a big decision. And so I think wait to fail can't be an option, and the system should be driving you earlier to ask questions about what your child's performance in reading or with word identification or with any of the evidence-based indicators that we look at are showing. And so the first place to go is their classroom teacher. Get an understanding of the reading, where your child's performing, what they're seeing. The final thing I want to say here is that nothing about these laws changes the laws under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Another piece we created is called, I think you're linking to it or something, Best Practices. It's more of like our wonky document, but it makes clear that Under IDEA, you have a right to request an evaluation at any time. Now, there may be in your state a response to intervention system that has a particular way of interplay with that. But you have rights. Nothing about these laws changes your right to request an evaluation at any time to see if your student has a disability. They may not, but it's fundamental to mention nothing is changing that law by applying these other state laws.
Well, that's really great to know, just the distinction, and make sure that parents know that they can always request an evaluation under IDEA, regardless of what these laws are saying. So this has been really great and I think really helpful. Thanks so much, Lindsay, for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and we'll have you back next month. And I'm going to thank everyone else who joined the chat for joining today. For a complete list of all your chances to ask expert questions from issues like third grade reading laws to dysgraphia to dyslexia, whatever interests you, please visit understood.org and go to the Experts Live section. Our next event will be tomorrow. It's on writing issues and dysgraphia. It's going to be a Facebook chat, so just go to facebook.com/understood to ask your questions tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And if you can't make it, remember that all our events will be archived on understood.org for you to watch at any time.
Hey,
thanks again. Oh, go ahead, Lindsay. Yes, no, absolutely.
I want to thank Megan Casey in my office. Megan Casey, our Policy Research and Advocacy Associate, did amazing work on these documents. And so I wanted to make sure we got her in here. If you have any questions, you can reach her directly as well.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And thank you to everyone who joined, and have a great day.
Thanks.